So what happens to Elowyn and Alaric? The story was so much fun to put together, and while I was putting it together, I just was really surprised at the twists and turns that it took, because I had a general sense of where this should go. But this really began as the story of a cloak and its magical abilities, and it expanded to something much more than that. And also, this video has a much different vibe than video number 1, so in the comments section, I would love to hear from you which style of delivery you like better, because we're really trying to figure out what the voice of this channel should be and figure out how to tell these Knightweave stories. But we can get to how these stories are told later. Let's continue with this tale about Alaric and Elowyn. So Alaric and Elowyn are having all of these conversations. They're meeting in secret. They're falling deeper in love with each other. And one afternoon, while they're walking on the parapet of the castle, Alaric stops and turns to Elowyn and tells her,
"The training is harder than ever, Elowyn. I fear our parting may be soon on the horizon."
And when Elowyn hears this, her heart sinks and anxiety crept into the corners of her mind. What would she do if she lost this man she had grown to love so much? Alaric was all she had ever wanted, and their love grew with each passing day. Soon they were speaking of a future together. They were planning a simple life away from the lords and ladies at court. They dreamed of having children and land where no one would bother them, and they could just spend their days together in peace. But then something happened that changed the course of Alaric and Elowyn's story forever. It was in the late summer, when Elowyn was tending to the queen's linens, that she was walking through the castle and heard voices coming from a door that had been left ajar. Candlelight shone through the door, and she recognized the king's voice. And other men in his presence were arguing with him.
"There are not enough men, sire."
"Then make the men we do have better."
Elowyn pressed herself as close to the crack in the door as she dared, recognizing the voice of the king.
"My hosts will march east for Gristlefang in 14 days, and they will return with my prize."
"My lord."
Elowyn did not recognize the voices who were arguing with the king, but whoever this was who was speaking to him was countering with a voice of reason.
"We do not know how many goblins Rankrock has under his command. It could be tens of thousands. We have no scouts who have returned from the goblin lands. Marching the men out so soon, it's reckless."
"Are you questioning my judgment, Garrick?"
Elowyn knew this name. Garrick Steelcrest was King Osric's highest-ranking general and one of his military advisors. And though Elowyn had never seen his face, she had heard stories of his ruthlessness and his cruelty, and he continued.
"No, sire. I do not question. I only offer words of caution."
"Then as I said, we will."
Elowyn did not hear the rest of the king's words. Her head was yanked backwards by the hair. She was drawn suddenly away from the door and reeled as she found herself face down on the stone floor of the castle. A familiar voice pierced through the dim light.
"Spying on the king?"
The blood drained from Elowyn's face. She recognized the voice, and she knew in an instant that her life was over.
"I trusted you,"
hissed the queen. She slapped her handmaid. The impact echoed through the empty hall.
"Do you have eyes for my king? I trusted you, Elowyn."
Elowyn knew instantly that this was all a misunderstanding. She had been spying on King Osric, trying to learn more about what fate lay ahead for her love, Sir Alaric, and the queen, whom she had served for over 10 years, believed that she was spying on the king, wanting to take him for her own, as a lover, or perhaps to replace the queen on her throne.
No,
stammered Elowyn as Queen Kyssana rounded on her. Elowyn tried to get to her feet, but the queen grabbed her by the hair again, pulling her behind her towards the queen's quarters. Once inside, the queen thrust Elowyn onto the ground.
"I should have known,"
spat the queen through tears.
"No, please, it's not what you think,"
pled Elowyn.
"You take me for a fool?"
Queen Kyssana shouted.
"I've seen you lingering in the shadows when Osric and I take our meals. You listen when I whisper with my advisors. Don't think I haven't noticed all the absent nights when you disappear into the darkness for hours."
Elowyn's voice caught in her throat.
"My queen."
"Your obsession with the king has cost you your head. I thought it was just in my mind, but no more. Next time I see your face, it will be on a platter."
The queen rounded on her heel to leave. Elowyn knew that in this moment she had to gamble everything if she wanted to keep her head, not just her life, but Alaric's as well. because Elowyn knew that in just a moment the queen's chamber would be flooded with her royal guards, who would lead Elowyn into the dungeons where she would die a long and cold, painful death, or if the queen was feeling particularly angry, she would be publicly executed. But Elowyn also knew that if she confessed to having a relationship with a knight, both her life and Sir Alaric's life would be forfeit. You see, in Mithranor, when someone is in direct service of the royal family, if they are not already married, they are not allowed to start relationships, have children, get married. This is true for knights as it is for handmaids. The duty of a handmaid or a knight is to serve the king or queen without question or without distraction, until they are relieved of their duties by either death or by the king or queen themselves. And the same is true for knights. In the kingdom of Mithranor, the rules for knights are fairly simple, but there's a high price to pay to become a lord of lands. You must first start as a knight and serve the king. Knighthood is a precursor to lordship, but before lands and titles of lord and the freedom to do with your lands what you will, you first have to serve loyally. And that means forsaking love, forsaking children, forsaking family, until your service of your king is complete. So if Elowyn tells the queen that she has been having a romantic relationship with a knight, it's bad for both of them. But the queen is walking towards the door. Elowyn knows that as soon as she walks through to the other side, the room will fill with guards and her life will be over anyway. And so Elowyn gambled with both her and Alaric's lives.
It's a knight,
she shouted. Her words echoed through the royal chamber. The queen paused with her hand on the door.
What?
She said softly.
I'm in love with a knight. I've been meeting him in the gardens.
Slowly, the queen turned around to look at her handmaid. Elowyn didn't know it, but jealousy had been building in the queen's heart for some time now, and she was suspicious that Elowyn had eyes for the king. If it was true that Elowyn had been meeting a knight in secret, and that was the reason for all of her strange behavior, it changed everything for Queen Kyssana. Now, Elowyn's sneaking around the castle also hadn't gone unnoticed, and rumors had started to spread and even made their way back to Queen Kyssana. People telling her that Elowyn spent extra time lingering in the king's presence, listening in on conversations. But the jealousy that had been growing in Queen Kyssana's heart began to fade, as she started to understand, because now the behavior of Elowyn made sense. And Queen Kyssana's jealousy gave way into pity and relief, because the queen loved Elowyn and didn't want to sentence her to death.
I've been dying inside, not knowing where my love will be sent, or what will become of him, or of us.
The queen studied Elowyn's face, and she saw no lie there. Elowyn had always been a faithful servant, and now the queen was looking for a reason to trust her. And Elowyn had always been the closest thing to family Queen Kyssana had had since she arrived in Mithranor and was married to Osric. Osric was a cold, calculated ruler, and he would come to his queen from time to time when desire drove him to. But he mostly just did what he wanted without any thought or care of how it might affect his queen. He was never a place of safety or companionship for Queen Kyssana. He never comforted her. That had always been Elowyn. And now, Queen Kyssana listened to Elowyn confess her feelings not for the king, but for a knight named Sir Alaric. But this wasn't just a confession about love, it was a confession about breaking her oath to the queen.
I broke my oath to you. I know the sentence that this confession carries, but please know it is not the king. My heart belongs to a knight who arrived with the king's call for bannermen. We've been seeing one another for some time now.
Queen Kyssana slowly studied Elowyn's face.
Who is he?
She demanded softly.
I cannot say.
Elowyn knew that if she gave the knight's name, they might both lose their lives.
Who is he, Elowyn?
Whispered the queen, kneeling next to her handmaid. Elowyn stared at the queen, tears streaming down her face, and she shook her head. But the queen continued.
If you tell me, you need not lose your life. But if you do not tell me, I will be forced to believe your story is a lie.
Elowyn studied the queen's face. To her surprise, the queen did not look mad. Her eyes were soft, and so Elowyn told her.
Alaric, I'm in love with Sir Alaric.
And then she broke down and cried into the queen's arms. And the queen held Elowyn, comforting her. They sat like that for a time, and then the queen spoke.
Finish my linens, and then go to Alaric. Forget the plans of my husband, or the fate of his armies, and stay away from him. He will do what he will, and knowing his designs will not stop them.
Elowyn studied the queen's face in disbelief.
Never betray me, Elowyn. Steal what time you can with your lover, but should I catch the slightest whisper that you have been seeking the company of my king, and you will beg for death before the end. But if you speak truth, perhaps I will have the joy of releasing you from your duties upon Sir Alaric's return, and you can tell me what it feels like to truly be loved.
Elowyn at this point just melts into the queen's arms again, embracing her out of relief and sadness, because Elowyn knew that the queen had always wanted to be loved by the king, and it was something, an affection that he maybe wasn't even capable of. Queen Kyssana led a lonely life, and Elowyn knew this. She knew the queen always wanted to feel beautiful, but because of everyone's fear of King Osric's wrath, Queen Kyssana never got the attention from the men or women at court, for that matter. At least not the attention that she craved. All of that attention came to Elowyn, even though she didn't want any of it. King Osric kept his queen on a very tight leash, neither showing affection to her or granting her the freedom to get the affection that she craved elsewhere. And no one within the castle walls dared comment on Queen Kyssana's beauty for fear of losing their own heads. And so Elowyn took her leave from the queen's chamber, and it was late that night when she met Alaric in the gardens. She collapsed into his arms sobbing.
I'm sorry, Alaric. I told the queen everything she knows about us.
And Alaric's heart sinks. He realizes that his life is about to end. Her life should have already ended. He studied her face in shock.
How are you here? You should be dead. I should be dead.
Elowyn touched Alaric's face.
I'm so sorry, I didn't know what to do. She thought I was chasing after the king. I panicked and I told her about us.
Alaric scanned the gardens looking for royal guards who he was sure must be closing in at any moment to arrest them both.
The queen said we have her blessing,
continued Elowyn. Sir Alaric's attention snapped back to Elowyn's face.
You mean to say the queen released you from your station?
No, but she said she will should you return from the king's campaign. She said she would bless our love.
Alaric's mind wandered from Elowyn's explanation as he scanned the castle windows until he saw a single window lit by candlelight, and he thought he saw the silhouette of a slender blonde woman with her hair catching in the candlelight. He blinked and then she was gone. The following weeks passed slowly. Alaric and both Elowyn felt at any moment they could be arrested. But that moment never came, and Alaric and Elowyn continued to meet each other in secret in the royal gardens after dark, and Elowyn was careful during this time to avoid the king at all costs, until one day Queen Kyssana herself informed Elowyn that the hosts of Mithranor would be marching for the Goblin lands the next morning.
Tonight,
said the queen,
I do not have duties for you. Go be with your Alaric, for you may not see him again.
But Elowyn had hope. Hope in their love, hope in Alaric, and hope in the mysterious contents of a strange box that she had brought with her to the capital 10 years earlier when she arrived by herself as an 11-year-old girl. It was a chest that contained a family treasure sent with her by her parents who knew they would likely never see their daughter again, and it was a treasure that ensured to them that their little girl would be safe no matter what dangers life in the capital would bring. So, on the eve of his departure, Elowyn pulled up the floorboards in her room, obtained this chest that had sat there for so many years, and snuck it down to the gardens. And it was here that she presented the chest and its contents to the man that she loved. Inside was a curious, beautifully woven red cloak, stained in some areas and wrinkled in others. Elowyn told Alaric,
This belonged to my grandfather.
Her voice trembled as she told him the story.
He told me a tale of a vine known only to the wood elves in the Vale Lumen. It was woven from that very vine and retains the vine's magic. It will keep you safe.
But Alaric was torn by the grief and knowledge of leaving in the morning and potentially never seeing Elowyn again that he dismissed her. Those are just stories, Elowyn, he told her. He was pessimistic and brooding.
Elowyn, those are stories told to children. I wish to return to you, but many of us will not. And a simple cloak is not going to do anything.
Listen to me,
interrupted Elowyn.
Once when I was a girl, my mother fell ill. She was dying, Alaric, but my father pulled this from under our floorboards and covered her with it. And within the hour, she was up on her feet again. It will protect you. Promise me you will wear it and that you will return to me.
Alaric studied the cloak.
I promise, Elowyn. I will return to you.
And he couldn't tell her no. Her eyes were so bright and hopeful.
Wear it as if it were my arms that hold you.
And Alaric, even though his heart was heavy, promised he would. They spent their last evening together in silence in the moonlit garden, and in the morning, Alaric joined the hosts of Mithranor as they set out from the castle, a massive army. And it seemed like the entire population of Mithranor gathered in the streets to see them off. And Alaric was fortunate enough to spot Elowyn within the crowd. The two looked at each other, unable to say goodbye, and all Elowyn could do was look at the man that she loved as tears filled her eyes as she watched him walk away, possibly for the last time. Now, this campaign that the king put together to try to steal the goblin warlord's gold was a grueling one. Osric's armies first took the pass between the Ivory Mountains, and this took them through wild lands inhabited by exiles, wild men, and pirates. And it was at the hands of pirates and wild men that King Osric's armies took its first casualties. It was on a crisp autumn day when Alaric and a group of his men were working their way ahead of the army, trying to secure a safe passage out of the mountains and into the lower plains. These plains were known as the Plains of Durnfell, and they were home to wild men and savage pirates who would sometimes work together to overthrow large caravans or even armies. And since Alaric and his men were part of a small scouting party, they soon found themselves surrounded by pirates and wild men. Severely outnumbered, Alaric watched his men fall beside him, one side, then the next, and in moments a spear pierced his side. And the pain of the spear was blinding, but then Alaric felt something that he had never experienced before, something like hot molten metal being poured into the wound that had just opened on his side. And he didn't know it, but this pain was the cloak's magic saving him. The fibers of the cloak will actually work their way into a wound, healing it, and it's a tremendously painful experience, but it happens very quickly. And being surrounded, Sir Alaric didn't have time to think about this. He just fought on, thinking that the next swing of his sword would be his last. But as time went on, he fell foe after foe after foe, until all the remaining pirates and wildmen ran away from him, retreating in fear. Alaric was shocked to find that they simply abandoned their attack. They retreated, which didn't make any sense because he was more outnumbered than he ever had been. It was just him and a handful of his other men that survived the sneak attack. But he was even more astonished after the battle to find that his clothes were in tatters. His armor had been pierced, so had his clothing, and it was soaked in blood, but he didn't have any open wounds, just a few new scars that he didn't recognize. And that night, Alaric studied these strange scars by the campfire on the outskirts of the king's army's encampment. And it was here that the weather turned suddenly cold, and Alaric felt a chill run down his spine. He felt that he wasn't alone and that he was being watched. Suddenly, a cold, chilly rattling filled the air, and it sharpened Alaric's senses, and he turned and could see through the darkness the form of an emaciated dark figure making its way towards him. He could see eyes and the shape of a nose, but then he realized there were no eyes where there should have been, simply empty sockets. He was staring at the face of a skeleton, emaciated and cloaked in black.
Who's there? Show yourself.
But the figure did not move. Alaric sprang to his feet, flashing his steel.
Are you friend or foe?
Shouted Alaric. His voice cracked. His wits were failing him. Fear that he had never known gripped his heart. And then the creature moved closer. Alaric could make out the sunken eyes and raisin-like pits behind them, shriveled eyeballs, and a grotesque, mummified skull that looked his way.
I am death. You are curious to me.
Death took another step towards Alaric.
Stay back!
Alaric boomed, drawing the rest of his sword, pointing it at his new unwelcome visitor. But Death lingered, simply studying him.
Your breath calls to me.
Death whispered, almost longingly. Alaric felt a shiver run down his spine, and he was compelled to ask, why? Death paused, seeming to think for a moment, and then he took a deep, rattling breath and disappeared off into the darkness. Now, in Mithranor, death and life are physical beings They're both omniscient and omnipotent, and they can take physical form and appear to individuals and have conversations with them. And Alaric's brush with death that was miraculously avoided intrigued Death, and Alaric didn't know it, but Death would soon become his constant companion. And as a result, Death is going to become a very important character to our story. But we'll get to that more later, because today's sponsor for this video, as always, is Knightweave. Here at Knightweave, we make fully functional, insanely comfortable cloaks, and if you'd like to get one of your own, head over to knightweave.com to claim what's yours. These things look amazing, they're sensory safe, they come in a variety of beautiful colors, and they're unbelievably soft. Right now, most orders are shipping in 1 to 3 business days, and we often sell out, so get yours while you can. Now back to our story. Now, after this meeting with Death, Death constantly was haunting Alaric's footsteps, not in a figurative sense, in a literal sense. Alaric could watch Death from the corner of his vision, following him, following the armies, and Death would draw closer to Alaric with every dangerous situation that he found himself in, and it started to take a toll on his mental health, but he always kept Elowyn in his mind, and that would ground him and center him. But back at the capital, Elowyn was facing her own set of dangers. Since King Osric no longer had his campaign to occupy his mind, he had become idle and bored. He spent all of his time indulging in his own kingly desires, drinking late into the night, having entertainment come before him and his queen in the royal hall, and he would take his leave into the city with his royal guards several nights out of the week, which was a tremendous embarrassment to the queen because she had always been loyal to Osric. In fact, she had always wanted nothing more than to be the object of his desires, but Osric wasn't even hiding what he was up to, and this caused Queen Kyssana to feel like a prop, put in place next to the king for optics. Osric's behavior during this time tormented the queen. She knew that he wasn't an honorable man, but he was her husband, and she wanted him to treat her like his wife. When they were married years before, she carried grand visions of what her life as queen would look like, how she would be treated by her king, and none of those things had come to fruition. Even though she was the queen, she felt like a prisoner. She felt like she was trapped in a pillory, one of those medieval things with a hole for your head and for your arms. She felt she was trapped there for all of Mithranor to point at and laugh at and throw food her way. She'd never experienced this in real life, but in her soul, that's how she felt day to day as King Osric disrespected her. He held all the power, and he only showed her affection on occasion, and Queen Kyssana dared not confront her husband about her feelings. Even though she craved more attention from her husband, she also was afraid of what more attention from her husband would actually mean. And she knew that more attention from King Osric might not be what she actually wanted, and this idea and prospect terrified her. But she craved so deeply to be seen as an object of beauty, to be chased after by someone. And while she was beautiful, she didn't feel it, for the lords and ladies at Mithranor dared not in any way suggest that they were attracted to Queen Kyssana for fear of losing their heads, because Osric had a short temper and a cold heart. And so it was Elowyn, the servant girl, the handmaid to the queen, who wound up being the recipient of all of the men's affection at court. All the unwelcome advances went Elowyn's way, and every day that Elowyn grew more beautiful, so too did the queen's need to feel valued and desired. And so it was late one fall night, after all the food and drink had been spent and the entertainment had gone home into the city, that King Osric started to round up his royal guard to head into the city himself. And it was this night that Queen Kyssana attempted to position herself between her husband and his pleasures in the city.
My king,
Queen Kyssana began.
Surely the city is not as exciting as what you could find within your own walls.
And when she said this, Osric was taken aback. He was hit with a mixture of surprise and anger, but Queen Kyssana flashed him a teasing grin, disarming him.
What could possibly be so enticing out there when a queen waits within the walls of your castle?
And to this, Osric laughed.
You are a woman, Kyssana. You know nothing of excitement.
Kyssana tried to be playful with her king.
You may find that your queen could surprise you.
She leaned in to kiss Osric, but she deeply underestimated Osric's depravity. He kissed her back, and for a moment her heart filled with excitement. She couldn't remember ever being kissed this passionately before. She felt maybe that the love had always been there and she just didn't see it or hadn't been open to it. But then, When Osric's lips broke away from hers, her heart went cold. The words that followed cut into her soul like ice.
Then surprise me,
Whispered Osric.
Bring in your servant girl.
Now, whether the king had been watching Elowyn from afar and had been planning this moment, or whether it was a cruel coincidence, the king's request set off a fire in Queen Kyssana. Against better judgment, she refused the king's request, and normally this would have made the king furious. But his fury was tempered by his sadistic nature because now he felt like he had a game to play. Rather than approaching Elowyn directly, King Osric began tormenting Queen Kyssana. He manipulated and pressured his wife to be the merchant of his twisted desires, which she constantly refused. And soon, King Osric's footsteps were haunting Elowyn's and the queen's. He spent more time with the queen, torturing her with questions about her handmaid, requesting her company. He reveled in the queen's anxious spiral into a fearful and self-conscious prison, and one evening the queen pushed back.
You can't have her, Osric. She's in love and she will never betray him. Not even for a king, and especially not you.
A cold, calculated anger stirred behind Osric's eyes.
You think she would deny me if I ordered her directly?
I know she will.
Queen Kyssana responded.
You're just a gutter beggar in her eyes.
Then I will make a pact with you, Kyssana, my queen. If she refuses a direct order from her king, I'll swear myself to you, and only you, to the end of my days.
And if she accepts?
If she accepts, you will serve her as handmaid to the king's mistress. You'll give your crown to the pigs and accompany the king's guard when I take my leave into the city.
Osric glared at her and stormed from the royal hall, and Queen Kyssana wept. And so, the next evening, King Osric called Elowyn into the royal hall, where he sat with his queen. The tension was palpable. Queen Kyssana held back tears and rage. She couldn't discern if she hated her husband more, or this young woman from the countryside who had inexplicably turned her life upside down simply by existing within the walls of the castle. She loved Elowyn, yes, but jealousy had grown into an unmanageable beast in her mind, fed by King Osric. As King Osric spoke, Queen Kyssana felt like she wasn't even present in the room. Her head spun, and she felt like she was listening to his words from the next room over. She finally was brought back into the moment, hearing Elowyn respond.
My lord,
Began Elowyn carefully.
I am flattered, but I could not dishonor the king and queen or your kingdom in this way. Your love for each other is a beacon of hope for the kingdom and an inspiration to all of your people.
Queen Kyssana's head spun less slowly. She wondered how King Osric would respond to this.
But you would further inspire our people,
Said Osric slyly.
You would be a symbol of upward mobility. You would be granted land. You would see your parents again. You'd be released from your station as handmaid, and when your time with your king is done, you'd be able to seek out other romantic interests.
Queen Kyssana nervously looked from her husband to her handmaid.
I would even allow you to release one of my military subjects from service. Perhaps you have a romantic interest whose safe return you wish to secure.
Elowyn shifted nervously.
It can all be yours,
Said Osric.
all in exchange for a brief season of serving your king.
The royal hall was silent for what felt like days. Elowyn didn't dare speak the words that were on her tongue.
Speak, girl!
Shouted Osric as his patience reached its limit. Began Elowyn.
I cannot betray my queen in this way, and I cannot betray my own heart. I beg the king's mercy, but you ask me something I cannot do.
Sobs erupted from Elowyn's chest. She knew that the queen might be merciful, but she knew Osric would not be. Queen Kyssana breathed an inaudible sigh of relief. Not sure where things would go next, but she did feel validated in this moment. And then King Osric spoke again, measured and steady.
What is his name?
Elowyn sobbed harder.
Tell me the name of this rat whose value is so much higher than the king's.
Elowyn squeaked out a feeble plea.
No one's value is greater than his majesty's, please.
What is his name?
Boomed Osric. Elowyn collapsed on the marble floor, unable to speak through heavy sobs.
Your tongue has few uses, girl,
Said Osric in a cool voice, and then he snapped for his guards. The king's guards closed in on Elowyn, grabbing her by either arm.
Please.
Begged Elowyn. As the royal guards gripped Elowyn by her hair, the queen's heart was moved, and panic took hold.
Osric, please.
Queen Kyssana begged.
What is his name.
The king's guard forced Elowyn's mouth open, grabbing her tongue with a pair of tongs.
It's Alaric.
Shouted the queen.
His name is Sir Alaric.
King Osric raised his hands, and his guards released Elowyn and took a step backwards, their steps echoing through the royal hall.
Sir Alaric,
Mused the king.
I know the name, but not the face. Your love for this man is inspiring, girl, and I wish to reunite you with your love.
Elowyn nervously looked at Queen Kyssana.
Alaric must be a mighty and handsome man to garner so much loyalty from a servant. I would hope to recognize such a man without introduction.
He stood up and walked towards Elowyn as he addressed his guardsmen.
Send word to General Garrick. Release Alaric from his duties immediately and bring him home. Oh, and feed his eyes, ears, and tongue to the raven that delivers the message.
No, please. Mercy, my lord. Please have mercy.
King Osric stepped closer to his queen's handmaid as she kneeled on the cold stone floor.
It is interesting to me that even with your tongue, it was the queen who spoke for you. If you mean so much to Queen Kyssana, she can speak for you from now on. Cut out her tongue.
There's kind of no better cliffhanger than there to leave this, so you can continue the story on video 3, which is probably out by now or a couple days away from releasing. And let us know in the comments section whether you like this less formal telling and style for these videos, or if you liked the more narrative, visually supported style in the first video, because we really want to find like what the voice of this channel is as fast as we can. And your feedback's really important. And as always, like and subscribe to be notified next time we have a story that drops.